Okay, up next, you've just heard about the Miami Hurricanes, Mario Cristobal and company. Now we are staying in South Florida, and we're going to hit some FAU, the Owls, 2022 Owls. Willie Taggart's year number 3 in charge in Boca. He finished 2021 5-7, lost the last 4 games. They were doing well, 5-3, lost the last 4 games of 2021. Ended up 3-5 in the conference. Some big news coming out of Boca. They are moving from Conference USA to the AAC, not this year, but next year. And we have nobody better to talk about all things FAU than the site publisher of owls247.com, Mr. Kevin Fielder. Welcome to the Florida Football Insiders podcast, Kevin.
Thanks for having me on, Jason. Anytime.
Appreciate you, man. All right, talk to me first about the move. What's the sentiment and what's the excitement level about the move from CUSA to the AAC next year?
I think I wrote about it when they actually joined, probably now what's like 6 or 7 months, it feels like, with all the other conference realignment news that has sort of gone on. But I wrote back then that this is the biggest move in FAU football history. It may arguably be the biggest move in FAU athletics history. I mean, when you look at, going from Conference USA to a bigger conference, a bigger market, the TV deals are so much bigger in the American, even if it gets adjusted, with teams like Charlotte and UCF leaving. But for FAU, it's a chance to get on ESPN. It's a chance to play some of the top teams, in Group of 5. We're talking about teams like SMU and Memphis, who are still in the conference, who, Memphis, even if they weren't that good last year, 2-3 years ago, were in the AAC championship game. I mean,
Sure.
This is one of the biggest moves for FAU, from a money standpoint, from an athletic standpoint, from, a marketing standpoint. There are a lot of moves that FAU have made over the past that are sort of helped build up to this moment. And I certainly think the success on the football field under Lane Kiffin, for those 3 years helped. But, this is just point blank the biggest move in FAU athletics history.
No, I agree. I think you'll see it on the recruiting trail as well. They'll get a little bit better player, athlete, to be able to come to Boca and come to FAU. It'll help the other sports too. The basketball program, the other non-revenue, some of the other non-revenue sports get a little bit better player and a little bit better athlete that'll be able to come down there because you're in a beautiful setting. You're in Boca. I mean, not many people can ask for a better place to go to college than South Florida, Boca Raton, and all the dressings and all the say what you want, whatever word adjective you want to use for all the stuff that goes on and down in South Florida. But yeah, I think it's a big move. And again, I think good for CUSA. You get the TV market, you get bigger the Miami, Fort Lauderdale, that whole area community involved. So I think it's, like you said, I think it's a good move all around. Willie Taggart, year 3. What's the chatter about Willie in year 3? Obviously, sounds like you struggled at the end of the year last year. Are they happy with Willie? Are they expecting more? What's the sentiment with Willie?
I think it's just, a sense of last season may have not gone their way. And, let's be real honest that Willie Taggart may have not always had the best of situations at FAU. When you look at his first year being the COVID year and they were playing games where they were missing 35 players. And, the fact they made a bowl game that year is impressive in and of itself. And last year, frankly, there is no excuse for the way that they finished last season. And every FAU player and every FAU coach has uttered those similar sentiments. There was no excuse for losing the last 4 games of the year when you needed one to make a bowl game.
Right.
And it's not like they were losing to the best teams in Conference USA. They definitely lost to 2 of the better ones in the conference in Western Kentucky and Marshall. But losing to ODU, losing to Middle Tennessee at home to end the year, those are games that FAU needed to win last year. And they just didn't happen. I think coming into this year, it's that seat's getting maybe a little bit hotter for Willie Taggart. There has to be results on the football field. Above all else, all the talk about recruiting and transfers and moving the American is cool, but results on the football field matter, and Willie Taggart needs to turn around this year. And I think he certainly has all the pieces to do so. They hit the transfer portal hard. They were able to get in a couple freshmen who are expected to make impacts. And you look at that offense and that defense, they return a lot of key players. There are certainly the pieces in place to turn around that 5-7 season, with just more consistency. And that's sort of the biggest thing, is finding more consistency throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, they were active. They've been active in the portal the last couple of years. 16 transfers the last 2 years. They brought in a couple key guys. This year, they're expecting to fill big roles. Let's go to the offense. Let's start with Nicosia Perry, the Miami transfer quarterback, had a good year, 2,800 yards, about 20 touchdowns last year passing. Johnny Ford, a guy that I know up here in Tampa, USF transfer, the running back. He played pretty well. A little scat back guy. I mean, I remember seeing him. I'm not very tall, but he's shorter than I am. He is a little guy, man. But he's got some juice and got some burst. And he's a good player, and in that kind of league, he can be a real weapon with some of the teams that they play. So just talk about the skill players. Obviously, Perry and Ford are both back. Talk about the skill players, quarterback, running backs, receivers at FAU.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because last season Nicosia Perry joined right before the start of fall, and he was thrown into the middle of a quarterback battle. The minute he stepped onto camp and the minute camp started, he was in a quarterback battle with incredibly high expectations, and something that Willie Taggart and Nicosia Perry have talked about throughout camp. When media has talked to him, is this is now a situation for him where he's not trying to figure out his teammates and win a starting job. Right. He came into camp as the expected starter, and he's taken on a huge leadership role. Every single player has talked about, the changes that he's made in leadership and approaching every single day differently. I think when you pair that with the returning skill positions that they have, I mean, we're talking 2 running backs who returned from last year, Larry McCammon and Johnny Ford. You're talking about adding another one in Nebraska transfer, Marvin Scott. The wide receiver room, you return your top 2 receiving targets in LeJontay Wester and Jaquan Burton. And then you have guys behind them who FAU are really excited about. A guy like Jamal Adrien, who's now a redshirt freshman, missed a majority of last season with, an injury and, wasn't able to get fully going. But there's a lot of expectations on a guy like him, who passed up Power 5 offers to come to FAU out of high school. FSU transfer Jordan Young is a guy who adds, I think, a sense of leadership and veteran, approach to the wide receiver room because, Jaquan Burton, LeJontay Wester are younger guys. Jamal Adrien is obviously just a redshirt freshman. The tight end room needs to get figured out. You have a couple guys who I think FAU like, but there hasn't been a guy who's separated himself in that room. It's former walk-on Austin Evans, Carter Boatwright, and FSU transfer. There are guys in that room that they like, but just overall, they haven't figured it out yet. And, the tight end position is an interesting one in Brent Dearman's offense, their new offensive coordinator who came from Middle Tennessee last year. But overall, when you look at their entire offensive skill position standpoint, there's a lot to like, across the board. And I think you pair that with a returning quarterback in Nicosia Perry, and there is the chances that this offense takes that huge leap that they've been looking for under Willie Taggart.
Offensive line, big transfer they brought in from Rutgers, Brendan Bourdain. They expected him to be a factor for them. Veteran offensive line, but maybe underachieved last year. Maybe didn't play as well. Sounds like they have a veteran group, but they need him to play a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, this is an offensive line group that has combined almost 10,000 snaps or close to it. I mean, this is an offensive line group that has tons of experience. Nick Weber has been their starting center for the last 3 years, and he returned taking his extra COVID super senior year.
Yep.
You obviously bring in Brendan Bordner from Rutgers, who's a left tackle who last season was able to, get consistent playing time for a Rutgers program and had Power 5 interest. But chose FAU, and that's a major get for FAU, especially at the offensive tackle position, where last season, I think there were high moments and there were certainly low moments for that offensive line. There were games where they was firing, they were clicking on all cylinders, and you were talking about one of the better offensive lines in the conference. But then there were games where they struggled, just to recognize things and react to things. But I think this year, another year under Coach Ed Warner, who is one of the more experienced offensive line coaches in college football, will certainly help. And adding guys like Brendan Bordner and having almost 10,000 snaps to that room is certainly going to help this team not have to have a transition, from year to year. And then it's also important to note that they added another left offensive guard in Dorian Hinton from Middle Tennessee, who has experience in the Brent Dearman offense.
Right.
From a year ago, was able to play an entire year in this offense and was a consistent starter for that team. So having all those pieces there, if they can find the right 5 guys, and it's going to be interesting to see who they trot out for week 1, because there's so much experience in that room and there's so many guys who had high moments, had low moments, and just, if they can get consistent and they can put it all together, that line can be one of the better, more experienced lines in not only, I think, Conference USA, but also in G5 and potentially in the nation with the amount of staffs between them.
Right. All right. So one thing I noticed looking at the stats, one thing the offense in general struggled last year, which is probably a direct reflection on their struggles on defense, was time of possession. About 27 minutes a game. They only average about 27 minutes a game time of possession. So I would imagine that's a area of emphasis is you want to hold the ball a little longer. Whether it's, use a little more time on the play clock, whatever the formula is, you need to be on that offense needs to be on the field longer. You got good skill guys. You got a good running game. Stay on the field longer to help protect that defense a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem going back to last year in terms of not having time possession was two things, really. It was timely mistakes. There were drives last year where they would consistently put together good play after good play, and they would drive down the field and get into, the opponent's territory, and then they turn the ball over.
Right.
Or they'd have a key drop on third down, have to punt the football away, or they'd have a key penalty on,
right,
second down and push them behind the sticks. And that has been something that I think Willie Taggart and the offensive staff really stressed on throughout the offseason, was correcting those mistakes and finding more consistent play. I think consistency is really the big key word for FAU this year, is finding more consistency. And then I think the second biggest problem last year was just not a consistent running game. You had Johnny Ford, who at times was incredibly gifted, but he had some injury problems throughout the year where he'd get banged up and miss a couple drives. And I just don't think FAU were able to find a consistent second option behind him. They had a couple guys who they tried, James Charles, Larry Buchanan, Malcolm Davidson, and then later in the year they tried guys like true freshmen Zubair Mobley and Kelvin Dean, and they were just never able to find a consistent second running back. So when Johnny Ford went out for any sort of extended time during games, it sort of spiraled into a sense of having to pass the ball, having to rely on passing the ball, and
correct.
It changed the way that defenses react to FAU, and more importantly, I think it just put them behind the sticks. And FAU is going to be a team this year that want to run the ball and want to consistently run the ball. And I think, as we talked about, having better guys behind Johnny Ford and with Johnny Ford, having a deeper running back room is certainly going to help them, hold on to the football longer, sustain more drives, and more importantly, keep that defense off the field so they're not having to come back in a minute, 2 minutes later after they got a key stop. Yeah, right. I mean,
yeah. All right, let's go to special teams before we get to the defense. Kicking game, 9 out of 12 last year, kicking field goals. The punting was pretty good last year. Any major notes that you want to add about whether it's kick return, the coverage teams, that kind of stuff heading into this year?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because they lose their starting punter, Matthew Hayball, who transferred to Vanderbilt, and they lost their starting kicker in Aaron Shariari. So they're trying to replace two guys, and they brought in another Australian punter, Riley Thompson, who was put on scholarship, and they have a kicker in Morgan Suarez, who was one of the better kickers, in Palm Beach County when he was in high school, and was able to kick a couple times last year. I think that this is going to be a room that is going to rely on those guys taking the steps that they expect. And, clearly they didn't go in, didn't get a veteran punter, so they feel like they have something in Riley Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall that's going to be the kind of underrated factor for FAUs. If they can keep teams in valuable field position for the defense and allow the defense to get into those positions. And I think more importantly, if they can find a consistent kicking game,
right,
it quickly turns that offense into one of, we have to score a touchdown every single drive to, if we can get in a field goal range a couple of times and we can get 3 points as opposed to getting 0 points, that adds 3 points to your total, obviously. And it helps, just consistently put together a solid football team from top to bottom.
And to me, I don't think I told you this, Kevin, I'm a former kicker back in the day in college. So I take special teams very seriously. The teams that are middle of the road, there's gonna be a lot of close games. So those hidden yards in the punting game, those kickoff return yards, making the 40-yard field goals that you need to make, don't miss extra points, things like that. That all dictate how coaches coach the game later on, whether you go for it on fourth down, whether you instead of kicking a long field goal, do you punt? Those are all the decisions where if you have reliable kickers and punters, that makes the game management part for Willie Taggart that much easier.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where if you look at it, there were times that Willie Taggart last year would go for it on 4th and 5, in those in that gray area for field goals where we're talking like maybe a 42 or 43
Right.
yarder, and you don't feel confident with your kicker. If you feel confident enough with your kicker, you're sending him out there for a 43-yard field goal. And if he makes it, there's 3 points that you may have not gotten.
Correct.
And and then in terms of punting, if you can pin a guy deep 10, if you can pin a guy inside the 10-yard line, you're talking about a completely different approach to the defense. The defense can sort of play its own game and not have to try and protect the sticks every single down. And then, something that we haven't mentioned is punt return and kick return. If you can get solid field position, and FAU is in this interesting position where they return their kick return and punt returner in LeJontay Wester and Jaquan Burton, you're talking about a situation where this offense doesn't have to go 80 yards. They only have to go 60 yards. Yeah, 65 yards. And, it may only, saying 15 yards doesn't make a big difference, but that's 15 at less yards, and that's 15 less yards to field goal range or 15 less yards to a touchdown. And in games last year where FAU were tight and trying to figure out and find that last stop, I think there were drives last year where they could have used just getting a field goal. And, going back to the sideline going, all right, well, we've got 3. It's no longer a 7-point game. Now it's only a 4-point game. We score a touchdown. We're back in this game. I mean, I think it's going to help if they can find a consistent special teams unit that they can rely on to consistently take that next step.
Does Taggart value that? Is that something they coach a lot?
Yeah, I mean, it's they have an analyst who's only dedicated to special teams, and they bring in Chad Lunsford, who's been a special teams coordinator in the past and has head coaching experience. And I think it's something that they've stressed is, finding consistency in the special teams game and just being able to, consistently rely on those guys and not make critical errors on those units, because that can just kill a team, and just deflate every kind of momentum that you have.
All right, so you're listening to the Florida Football Insiders, and with Kevin Fielder. He's the site publisher for owls247.com. He knows all things FAU. We're breaking down the FAU roster, coaching staff. We're going to get to the schedule here in a few minutes. But again, all things FAU. Kevin, tell everybody where they can find your work. Is it all at Owls 24/7?
Yeah, I mean, my personal Twitter is at the Kevin Fielder. I tweet from there sometimes at Owls 24/7 and owls247.com.
Yeah, he does a great job covering all things FAU. All right, let's get to the defense. One of the good stats, they were best in the league last year on third down conversions, on third down defense. Sounds like they need a pass rush, needs to be better. Just give me your overall general thoughts on the defense.
Biggest thing is finding a consistent pass rush. This is a Todd Orlando defense that relies on having consistent pass rush, especially from the outside, from your edge rushers. They return Jalen Joyner, who is at times has proven that he's one of the better pass rushers in the league. They bring in a JUCO transfer in Xavier Peters, who I think they're really excited about. They bring in a Tennessee transfer, Morvin Joseph, who will likely employ some sort of pass rush role. I mean, this is going to be a unit that if they can find what they were missing last year, and injuries certainly didn't help them last year in terms of pass rush, but they can find that's going to really help them, especially when you talk about that cornerback room. It's sort of been the biggest question mark throughout camp is who's starting at cornerback when you have to replace your starting cornerbacks from last year, technically all 3 of them, from the opening game from last season. Now it sort of becomes a situation of, well, you have one guy in Romaine Smoke Mungin, who they love and has consistently been able to put together good performances. He's likely a starter at some point, but they brought in 2 transfers in Damon Hill and Michael Anton from Iowa State, or from Central Michigan and Iowa State, respectively. They have a guy in Jaden Williams who's last year had some good moments. I think he was sort of playing out of position. He's more of a nickel corner than the slot outside corner that they put him at. But I think overall, if you could find who your starting 3 are at cornerback, if you can find a pass rush, you've got all the other pieces across this defense to be a really good defense in Conference USA. TJ Young is one of the better safeties in Conference USA, and last season, got robbed of being on one of the all-conference teams. Evan Anderson is 330 pounds of pure strength and pure dominance. He's one of the better nose tackles in Conference USA. You have guys around the question marks at pass rusher and cornerback. You just have to find who's going to start at cornerback, and who are your best pass rushers and how can you put them in situations to succeed, because last season they just didn't have a pass rush throughout the year, and they were trying to rely so much on these cornerbacks and so much on that back 7 of making plays that when it got down to it, they just couldn't consistently get off the field or consistently create enough plays where they were putting teams behind the sticks. And that's
Right.
something that they sort of stressed last year. And I think it's something that, Todd Orlando has always stressed, playing really aggressive and trying to get teams into those unfavorable situations.
And when you have to, and like your point on the pass rush is when you have to blitz a fifth and sixth guy, that exposes the safeties and the DBs a little more. You got to play man behind it, where if you can get some pressure with four guys, you can play the back seven, can be an effective part, and you don't have to be as skilled back there because you got some help and you got some numbers back there to cover.
Yeah, I mean, if you can blitz four all game, and I think every defensive coordinator in the nation will tell you, if you can blitz four all game, you're going to win every football game. If you can blitz four consistently, you're going to win every football game, because then you've got seven guys covering, and you've got seven guys taking up every single spot on the defense. And even if you play man, or even if you play zone, you've got seven guys out there who can protect you. But when you're blitzing 5-6 like they were last year, that's leaving these cornerbacks on islands that they I think they played well. Zion Gilbert played particularly well last year. And I think, Khalif Bryce and some of those other guys played really well throughout the year, but it's just not a winning recipe
for football.
It's not a winning recipe for football. I mean, you can win some games blitzing 5 or 6 all day, but you have to be able to win with 4. And last season, FAU just wasn't able to win with 4 throughout the year. So they were constantly having to send extra guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's and you mentioned Zion Gilbert. He's in training camp with the Giants. So, I mean, he's an NFL prospect kind of guy. So you lose a big piece back there at corner. So, all right, let's get to the schedule. FAU's one of the teams that starts this weekend. Got a conference game with Charlotte Saturday night. Home game, correct?
Yes, it is a home game, and it's a very unique position for FAU in the sense of playing a conference opponent to start the year.
Yeah. So it's a more critical, there's no cupcake to start the year. It's not a non-conference. You got to come out the gates ready to go. And it might help them that they have a veteran team. You got a veteran quarterback, you got running backs, you got, veterans. So that might help them get them dialed up a little quicker, where if you had a bunch of new guys, new quarterback, new everything, it'd be a more challenge. So Charlotte week 1, then 2 weeks later, you got UCF at home, which is a big, huge in-state game, a lot of bragging rights. And then you have Purdue on the road the following week of the 24th. So the opening 3-4 weeks of the season is going to be you'll know where FAU is going to probably wind up being as far as, overall record ballparkish, after that Purdue game.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to know who FAU is after the first 5 weeks of the season. You're going to know if they're a team that is going to compete for a Conference USA championship, if they're a team that's going to be, I think one of those middle of the pack teams that is, 8-4, something like that, consistently playing good opponents and consistently playing good games, or if they're just another team that's going to struggle. I mean, those first 5 games are going to make or break FAU season. You talk about starting, with a conference opponent and having to win that first game. Because I think that, conference games are going to be so important for FAU. And, you can talk all you want about the UCFs and the Purdue games that are, fun games to potentially win. If you want to win a conference championship, you got to win in the conference. I mean, that's
home games, and you got to win your home games.
Yeah. I mean, no one cares if you beat UCF if you don't make a conference title, or if you aren't a good team in conference, because that's where the bulk of your schedule comes. And, I think that the UCF Purdue games are sort of interesting because FAU has not beaten a Power 5 opponent in their last one was Minnesota, and I think that was in like the 2010s or something. I mean, it's been a while since they've been able to beat a Power 5 opponent. Purdue's one of those sort of mid-tier Power 5 opponents where you're like, they could constantly be on upset alert, or they could constantly be the ones upsetting other teams. You look back to that year where they beat number 2 Ohio State as sort of the perfect example to that. UCF is a team that has question marks, and the last 2 times that FAU has played UCF have been able to pretty much run them out the stadium and outplay them for an entire game. But it's sort of this unique situation where FAU can start the season 4-1 and have all this kind of momentum. And you're talking about, we lost one of those games against UCF Purdue, but we beat the other one. They could also start 3-2 and, have your 3 expected wins in Charlotte, Southeastern Louisiana, and Ohio, and go, you know what, we didn't beat those 2 teams. If we play them well, that's a different situation. And I think there's also a situation where they're 2-3 or 1-4, and you're talking about them losing to a team like a Charlotte,
Ohio.
Yeah, or an Ohio of a team that they should be beating. But I think you're going to know who FAU is after the first 5 weeks of the season. And then after that, it's going to be a matter of keeping that consistency. You have games after that are going to be, I think, difficult. You look at UAB and Western Kentucky, who are going to
Yep.
be two of the better teams in conference.
Yep.
You obviously, it's hard to not mention the Shula Bowl, even if FAU have consistently beaten their biggest rivals in FIU. But I mean, there are games after this stretch of those first 5 games that are going to be good ones to watch and good ones to see where FAU currently stand. I mean, I look at the game right after Purdue is North Texas, and North Texas is a team that may very well improve off of what they've done last year. Sort of like FAU, they return a lot of their key players from last year. But if you aren't good in your first 5 weeks of the season, I think there are going to be a lot of fans and a lot of people who are just frustrated with the inconsistencies. And I think it's so important that they, not only start off well, but they got to win that first game. That first game is going to really, it could potentially define their entire season. And I think it sounds crazy going, well, one game is going to define your entire season in week 0, but
the momentum it could create, it could kill the momentum if they were to fall and stumble.
Yeah, I mean, that's not only that, but that's also a conference game. This isn't just a game against UCF. If UCF was week 0, you lose the game, you look forward and you've got all these conference games left.
Yeah.
You've got all these conference games left, but you lose that first conference game. Who knows what happens after that? So I think it's going to be so important that they start off well against Charlotte, and under Willie Taggart, they've beaten Charlotte twice. So, they're looking to go 3-0 against them, but Charlotte is, again, one of those teams that can be dangerous on any given day. We saw it last year when they beat a Power 5 opponent. If they find their right consistency, they're a team that can beat you at any point.
Last question, I'll get you out of here. About this goes back to Willie Taggart. Taggart has been known as a tremendous recruiter over the years. South Florida, Oregon, FSU can recruit guys, can get them to campus. But I think the big question with Willie has been, can he coach them up? Can he get the most out of guys when he gets them onto campus? What is your sense of the coaching staff as a whole? Do they do a good enough job of getting the most out of what they got?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is going to be the biggest year for FAU in that sense. I remember looking back at it, and I looked back at it, and they were playing guys 2 years ago who were true freshmen who just got on campus during a COVID season. And It has all been sort of building towards this third year of getting all these guys who are consistent players and who can win at a consistent level. The biggest thing for FAU, and they've stressed this a lot, is developing. We want to be able to develop, and I think it was Tyler Orlando who said this at one point. We want to have a 3 or 4 deep. We want to be able to have 4 deep at a position where we can rely on them if needed, and they provide their own internal competition. We don't want to be manufacturing competition throughout the year.
Right.
And I think that's been the biggest part for FAU. And I think now you're in the situation where you're looking at guys who are, you look at a guy like LaJohntay West and Evan Anderson, who got on campus with Willie Taggart. They played as freshmen.
Yep.
And now they are some of the better players on this football team. And they are some of the better impactful players. And, you look at guys from last year's class that they expect to take steps up. A guy like Jaden Williams is a guy who may very well start for FAU in week 1. A guy like Jay Sean Platt, who they just got on campus, for I think summer of this year or winter of this year, is a guy who they may very well play at wide receiver. There are guys that they really like, across the board, young talents that they really like, that they rely on. It's just a matter of finding the right pieces, but development has been the biggest thing. And I think that's why they went out and they got guys like Brandon Harris, the cornerbacks coach. They went out, they got a guy like Derek Gibson as their safeties coach. These are guys who have developed talent. Derek Gibson is a former Miami high school football head coach. Brandon Harris played cornerback at the University of Miami. And these are guys who have the experience. A guy like Billy Gonzalez on offense, former wide receiver coach for Florida. These are guys who have been around the block and guys who know how to develop talent. The biggest thing is just being able to develop some of these younger guys so you're not consistently relying on having to go to the transfer portal and get 16 transfers in 2 years, because that's not always sustainable football. It may work at certain points, but you want to be able to develop from within. And I think that's the biggest thing that Willie Taggart has preached. That's coming here is, we want to be able to develop our own homegrown talent. We don't want to have to consistently go in the transfer portal, and we would rather just go in and pluck the needs that we need and, bring in 4 guys in the transfer portal class of consistent talents.
Great job, Kevin, man. That's an awesome analysis on the programming, the coaching staff, the offense, defense. I mean, excellent job. Definitely check out Kevin's work at owls247.com. Site publisher. Again, you put out stuff every, multiple times a week. You'll be at the game, I'm sure, Saturday night against Charlotte, putting
Almost out. Unfortunately, I don't love the late night games. I really do not.
Well, at least it won't be 105. It might be 95 when they kick off, but at least it won't be 105. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, at least it won't be ungodly hot. But Still, I mean, I would rather it be a 3:30 kickoff where we're all out of there by 9 o'clock. But
we'll keep up the great work, Kevin. We'll definitely have you back on as the season moves along, and continue success, man.
appreciate it, Jason. Anytime, man.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin. And we'll be back with the next up. We're going to talk University of South Florida Bulls with Colin Sherwin. We'll be right back.